In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers began a winter expedition into the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. Their goal was simple: to complete a challenging ski trek across one of the most isolated mountain regions in the country. They were well trained, they were well prepared, and they had successfully completed similar expeditions before. At first, everything seemed routine. The group documented their journey with photographs and notes as they moved deeper into the mountains. Then something unusual happened. Weeks later, search teams finally reached their campsite. What they found raised serious questions. The tent was still standing, but the fabric had been cut open from the inside. Footprints in the snow showed that the hikers had left their shelter during the night. They walked down the mountain slope toward a nearby forest. Temperatures that night were estimated to be close to -30 degrees Celsius. Under those conditions, leaving a protected shelter without proper winter equipment would be extremely dangerous. Investigators began asking a simple question: why would experienced hikers abandon their tent in the middle of the night? And what happened after they left the campsite? More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most discussed mysteries in mountaineering history. To understand what may have happened, investigators first needed to reconstruct the events that led the group to that mountain slope. The expedition was organized by students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, an experienced hiker who had already completed several demanding winter expeditions. The team consisted of 9 members, all trained in ski trekking and winter survival. Their objective was to reach a remote mountain called a Torten, a peak located deep within the northern Ural range. The route required crossing forests, frozen rivers, and exposed mountain slopes. It was a difficult journey, but the group prepared carefully. They carried skis, winter tents, cameras, and supplies designed for extreme cold. In late January 1959, the hikers began their journey by train, traveling north from the city of Sverdlovsk. From there, they continued by truck and eventually on skis into the wilderness. During the first days of the expedition, the team recorded their progress through photographs and written notes. These records would later become important clues for investigators. One member of the group, Yuri Yudin, turned back early because of health problems. He left the expedition before the hikers entered the most remote section of their route. This unexpected decision would later prove significant. The remaining 9 hikers continued toward the mountains. For several days, the journey progressed according to plan. But as they approached the higher elevations of the Ural Mountains, conditions began to change. Weather became more difficult. Strong winds began to move across the slopes. On February 1st, the hikers reached the side of a mountain known as Kholat Syakhl. The name is sometimes translated as Dead Mountain. It was here that the group decided to set up camp for the night. At the time, it likely seemed like a routine decision. But the events of that night would soon become the center of a very unusual investigation. On the afternoon of February 1st, the group prepared their campsite on the open mountain slope. The weather was becoming more difficult. Wind moved steadily across the exposed terrain. Despite these conditions, the hikers decided to remain on the hillside rather than descend into the forest below. There may have been a simple reason. Camping higher on the slope allowed them to continue their route more easily the following morning. The team secured their tent using skis and poles placed in the snow. Inside the shelter, they organized their equipment and prepared their evening meal. Photographs later recovered from their cameras show the final moments of that day. The images show the group working together and preparing the camp. Nothing in those photographs suggests that the team expected any unusual events that night. For experienced hikers, difficult weather was part of winter expeditions. Yet, during the night, something changed. Investigators later discovered that the tent had been cut open from the inside. Instead of leaving through the entrance, the hikers created openings in the fabric and exited directly onto the snowy slope. Outside the tent, search teams would later find a line of footprints leading away from the campsite. The tracks moved down the mountain toward a forest about 1.5 kilometers away. Some of the footprints suggested that several hikers left the tent without full winter clothing. In temperatures close to -30 degrees Celsius, remaining outside for long periods would be extremely difficult. Why would experienced hikers leave their shelter under such conditions? Something inside the tent must have caused the group to leave quickly. But the situation became even more puzzling when investigators followed the tracks into the forest. There, they would discover the first clues about what happened after the hikers left their camp. When the group failed to return on the expected date, concern began to grow. At first, delays were not unusual for winter expeditions. Weather conditions could easily slow progress. But as days passed without communication, a search operation was organized. Teams of volunteers and experienced mountaineers entered the Ural Mountains to follow the planned route. After several days of searching, rescuers reached the campsite. The tent was partially covered by snow, but it was still standing. When investigators examined the shelter more closely, they noticed something unusual. The fabric had been cut open from the inside. Inside the tent, many personal belongings remained in place: warm clothing, boots, and equipment. Outside the tent, investigators noticed a line of footprints leading toward the forest. The tracks suggested that the group moved together in the same direction. Search teams followed the trail across the frozen landscape. Near the forest, they discovered signs that the hikers had attempted to start a small fire. Broken branches high in a tree suggested that someone had climbed upward, possibly to observe the campsite from a distance. As the search continued, investigators gradually located the members of the expedition at different points along the slope. The pattern of these discoveries suggested that some hikers may have tried to return toward the campsite. Yet the full sequence of events remained difficult to reconstruct. Investigators now faced a new question. What could have forced the group to leave their tent during the night? To answer that question, researchers began examining several possible explanations. Over the years, researchers have proposed several explanations for the events at Dyatlov Pass. One widely discussed theory involves a small movement of snow on the mountain slope. In this scenario, shifting snow may have created pressure near the tent. Concerned about the stability of the area, the hikers may have decided to leave the shelter and move toward a safer location. Other researchers have focused on wind conditions on the exposed mountainside. Strong mountain winds can sometimes create unusual pressure changes and sound patterns. Under certain conditions, these effects could make a campsite uncomfortable or unstable. If strong winds affected the tent structure, the hikers may have decided to move away from the exposed slope. Modern studies have also examined the natural environment of the region. The northern Ural Mountains are known for rapidly changing weather conditions, deep snow, strong winds, and extremely low temperatures. Even experienced mountaineers can face unexpected challenges in such environments. Recent scientific research has attempted to reconstruct the terrain and weather conditions present during the winter of 1959. Some studies suggest that a combination of environmental factors may have contributed to the events of that night. However, because the incident occurred in a remote mountain region during extreme winter conditions, not every detail can be reconstructed with certainty. What remains clear is that the Dyatlov expedition took place in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Today, the Dyatlov Pass Incident continues to attract the attention of researchers and historians around the world. More than 60 years later, the events on that mountain slope still encourage careful analysis. And while several explanations have been proposed, The full sequence of events during that winter night may never be known with absolute certainty. What remains is the legacy of an expedition that became one of the most discussed mysteries in mountaineering history.